My name is Clark, and I'm 95 years old, and I'm about to tell you something that might make you angry. Everything you think you know about who runs the world, who makes the decisions, who's really in control, it's completely wrong. And the worst part, the people who benefit from you believing the lie, the experts, the authorities, the leaders, they either don't know they're lying or they're too invested in the system to tell you the truth. You see, I spent the first 70 years of my life on the inside. I worked in government. I worked in international banking.
I sat in rooms where policies were written that affected millions of lives. I had security clearance. I knew people whose names you'd recognize, people who appear on television and tell you how the world works. But at 73, something happened that shattered everything I thought I understood. And what I discovered in the 22 years since then has completely changed how I see power, control, and who's really driving this bus we're all riding on. But before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand something. The reason I'm making this video isn't to sound smart or to feel important. I'm making this because I'm running out of time, and there are things you need to hear before it's too late. Not for me. I'll be gone soon. For you. Because right now, you're living under an illusion that's stealing your power, and someone needs to tell you before you waste your entire life waiting for permission that's never coming. At 73, I was asked to consult on a major economic policy decision. I can't tell you which one. I signed papers, made promises, but I can tell you what happened in that room. There were 12 of us. PhDs from Harvard, Yale, Oxford, people who'd written the textbooks, people who'd advised 3, 4, 5 presidents, the smartest people you could possibly assemble. And we had no idea what we were doing. I watched as these brilliant minds, people I'd respected for decades, argued in circles for 6 hours. Every suggestion was met with, but what about this variable, or the models don't account for that? We were trying to predict how millions of people would respond to a policy change, trying to forecast economic ripples 3, 5, 10 years out. And you know what I realized, sitting there at 3 in the morning, drinking my 5th cup of coffee? We were guessing. Educated guessing, sure. Sophisticated guessing with fancy mathematical models, but guessing nonetheless. The final decision came down to this. We were all exhausted. Someone suggested a compromise position. No one had the energy to argue anymore. We voted. It passed. We wrote it up to sound confident and definitive, and that became policy. Here's the part that still haunts me. It worked, or at least it didn't cause a disaster. The economy did what we hoped it would do. And everyone, the media, the public, even most of the people in that room, assumed we'd known exactly what we were doing, that we'd planned it that way, that our expertise had guided us to the right answer. We took credit, we gave interviews, we wrote papers explaining our brilliant reasoning. But I knew the truth. We'd gotten lucky. And that's when I started paying attention differently. Really paying attention to how decisions were made, to what expertise actually meant, to who was really in control. Let me save you 70 years of confusion with one simple truth. Nobody is driving the bus. You know why? Because there is no bus. There's no plan. There's no secret group of people who have it all figured out, pulling the strings, making it all make sense. There's just a bunch of humans, as confused and scared as you are, making it up as they go along and hoping they don't screw up too badly. I see young people today, and they're paralyzed. Paralyzed by the belief that somewhere someone knows better, that the experts have the answers, that the leaders have a plan, that if they just wait long enough, study hard enough, follow the rules carefully enough, someone will tell them what to do, and it'll all work out. Let me tell you about my friend Richard. Brilliant man. 3 PhDs. Genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever met. He was considered the foremost expert in his field, international monetary policy. People flew across the world to hear him speak. His papers shaped how entire countries managed their economies. We were having drinks one night, just the two of us, and he'd had a bit too much whiskey. He leaned over and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Harold, can I tell you a secret? I have no idea what I'm doing. I make educated guesses based on incomplete information, and I hope I'm right more often than I'm wrong. That's it. That's the whole thing." I thought he was being modest. I laughed it off. But then he got serious. He said, "No, I mean it. Our entire field is built on assumptions we can't prove, using models that barely work, trying to predict systems so complex that we might as well be reading tea leaves. But we can't say that out loud because then everyone would panic. So we act confident. We use complicated language. We hide our uncertainty behind mathematics. But underneath, we're all just guessing. Richard died 6 years ago. Heart attack at his desk, working on another paper full of confident predictions about unknowable futures. His work influenced billions of dollars in policy decisions, and he spent his whole career knowing it was all sophisticated guesswork, dressed up as science. That's not unique to economics. I've seen it in medicine, in education, in military strategy, in every field where humans claim to have answers to impossibly complex questions. The emperor has no clothes, but everyone pretends he does, because admitting the truth is too terrifying. Here's what nobody wants to tell you. The people making decisions that affect your life, the politicians, the CEOs, the experts on television, they're not more capable than you. They're not smarter. They don't have access to secret information that makes it all make sense. They're just more willing to act confident despite uncertainty. That's the only difference. I watched the 2008 financial crisis happen. I knew people at the highest levels of banking and government. People whose job it was to see these things coming. You know what they were doing in 2007? Congratulating themselves on how well they understood the system, how stable everything was, how sophisticated their models had become. Then it all collapsed. And these same people, the ones who'd missed every warning sign, were suddenly on television explaining what went wrong and what we needed to do to fix it. Nobody asked the obvious question. If you didn't see this coming, why should we trust you now? Here's why. Because we need to believe someone is in control. The alternative is too scary. The alternative is accepting that we're all just making it up, that chaos is the default state, that order is a temporary illusion we maintain through collective agreement. But I'm 95 years old. I don't have time for comforting lies anymore. And you shouldn't either. Because here's what happens when you believe the lie. You wait. You wait for permission. You wait for the right time. You wait for someone who knows better to tell you what to do. You spend your whole life in the passenger seat, assuming someone else is driving, and then you die having never realized you could have grabbed the wheel anytime you wanted. I've watched this happen to so many people. Smart, capable people who never did anything meaningful with their lives because they were waiting for validation from authorities who didn't know any more than they did. My daughter's like this. Brilliant woman. Absolutely brilliant. She wanted to start a nonprofit 20 years ago. Had a clear vision, passion, capability. But she kept waiting. Waiting to get more credentials. Waiting to network with the right people. Waiting for someone with authority to tell her it was a good idea. She's 68 now. She never started it. She spent 20 years waiting for permission that was never coming. Because the people she thought had the authority to give permission were just as uncertain as she was. They just hid it better. That's the cost of the lie. Not just wasted time. Wasted lives. Let me tell you about certainty. Real certainty. I've made hundreds of major decisions in my life. Career changes. Investments. Relationships. Moves across countries. And you know which decisions turned out best? Not the ones I made after careful analysis and expert consultation. Those went about 50-50. The best decisions I ever made were the ones where I acted on incomplete information, because it felt right. Where I trusted my gut over the experts. Where I moved forward despite uncertainty, instead of waiting for certainty that would never come. The worst decision of my life, I can pinpoint it exactly, was when I turned down a job opportunity at 47. I did a thorough analysis. I consulted experts. I made spreadsheets. I weighed every factor carefully. And based on all that careful consideration, I said no. It was the wrong call. I knew it within 6 months. That opportunity never came around again, and all my careful analysis had been based on assumptions that turned out to be completely wrong. Meanwhile, the best decision of my life was marrying my second wife, Ruth, at 76. We'd known each other 3 months. Everyone told me I was crazy. Too fast, too risky at my age. I had maybe one conversation with anyone who supported it. I married her anyway. We've had 19 years together so far. Best years of my life. And I made that decision on pure instinct, with almost no data to support it. Comfort with uncertainty isn't just useful, it's essential. The people who thrive aren't the ones with the best plans. They're the ones who adapt fastest when the plan falls apart, which it always does. I see this generational divide. Young people today have more information than any generation in history, more education, more access to experts, more tools for analysis and planning. And they're more paralyzed than we ever were. You know why? Because all that information creates the illusion that certainty is possible. That if you just research enough, plan enough, consult enough experts, you can eliminate risk and make the right decision. But that's not how life works. Life is irreducibly uncertain. The future is unknowable. No amount of planning changes that. And the more you try to achieve certainty before acting, the less you actually do. My generation didn't have that problem. Not because we were braver, because we didn't have a choice. We couldn't Google 20 articles about whether to take a job. We couldn't consult online forums about whether to move to a new city. We just had to decide and see what happened. And you know what? We made mistakes. Lots of them. But we also actually lived. We actually did things. We built careers and families and lives without waiting for permission or certainty. Here's something nobody tells you about expertise. Expertise means you've had opportunities to learn, not that you actually learned. Credentials mean you sat in classrooms and passed tests. They don't mean you understand how the world actually works. I've seen credentialed experts be catastrophically wrong about their own fields. I've seen dropout entrepreneurs build billion-dollar companies. I've seen self-taught programmers run circles around PhDs. I've seen grandmothers with no formal education solve problems that stumped think tanks. Expertise is real. Knowledge is valuable. But they're not the same as wisdom, and they're definitely not the same as certainty. The most valuable skill isn't knowing more. It's acting effectively despite knowing less than you'd like. Let me tell you about power. Real power. Not the fake power you see on television. The real stuff. Power isn't about being in charge. It's about being willing to act when everyone else is waiting for someone to tell them what to do. I saw this in the 60s during the civil rights movement. The people who changed everything weren't the ones with the most authority or the best credentials. They were the ones who stopped waiting for permission and just started acting. Rosa Parks wasn't the head of anything. She was a seamstress who decided not to move. That's it. And that small act of refusing to wait for permission changed the country. I saw this in my own field. The biggest policy changes I witnessed in 50 years didn't come from brilliant experts with perfect plans. They came from persistent people who kept pushing their idea despite being told no, despite lack of credentials, despite experts saying it wouldn't work. One change in particular, again, can't say which, came from a mid-level analyst who was just annoying enough, persistent enough, willing enough to be called naive and stupid and unrealistic that eventually people gave in just to shut him up, and it worked. And then everyone pretended it had been the plan all along. That's how it actually works, not grand visions from brilliant minds. Persistent action from people who refuse to wait for permission. You have more power than you think. Not because you're special, because nobody else has any more than you do. They're just more willing to use it. The question isn't, am I qualified to do this? The question is, am I willing to try? Let me tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was 30. When I was still building my career, still trying to impress the right people, still believing the myth. I wish someone had said, Harold, most of what you think is permanent structure is actually just collective agreement that could change tomorrow. The economy? Made up. Money? Made up. Government? Made up. Your career path? Made up. Social rules about who gets to do what? Made up. None of it is natural law. It's all human invention. And anything humans invented, humans can reinvent. The people who act like these things are fixed and unchangeable. They either benefit from the current arrangement or they're too scared to imagine alternatives. But nothing about how we organize society is inevitable or permanent. And that means you can make up your own rules. I didn't understand that until I was in my 70s. I wasted 40 years playing by rules that didn't have to exist, seeking approval from people who had no special authority to grant it, waiting for permission from a system that was just as made up as any alternative I could have invented. What would I have done differently? I would have started my own firm at 35, instead of waiting until 53. I would have said no to prestigious positions that made me miserable. I would have moved to the city I actually wanted to live in instead of the one that looked good on a resume. I would have trusted my own judgment over expert consensus. I would have acted like I had the right to decide for myself what mattered. Because I did. We all do. We just don't realize it. Here's what scares people about this truth. If there's no plan, no one in control, no authority that really knows better, then you're responsible for your own life in a way that's genuinely terrifying. You can't blame the system or the experts or the people in charge when things go wrong. Because they're just making it up too. But here's the flip side. Here's why this is the most liberating truth you'll ever hear. If nobody knows better than you, you can trust yourself. If the rules are made up, you can make up better ones. If there's no script, you can write your own. If authority is just people who decided to act confident, you can do that too. You're not waiting for your turn. There is no turn. There's just people acting and people waiting, and you get to decide which one you'll be. I'm 95 years old. I've worked with presidents and CEOs and Nobel Prize winners. I've sat in rooms where history was supposedly made, and I'm telling you from the inside, from someone who was there, they don't know what they're doing either. They're just doing it anyway. And that's the only difference between them and you. So here's my question for you. What would you do if you really accepted that? If you really internalized that nobody has the answers, nobody knows better, nobody's going to give you permission or tell you when you're ready. What would you start? What would you stop? What would you say yes to that you've been saying no to because you're waiting for the right time or the right credentials or the right validation? Because I promise you, the right time isn't coming. The credentials won't make you feel ready. The validation won't happen until after you've succeeded, and maybe not even then. You're exactly as qualified right now as you'll ever be to decide what matters to you and act on it. I've buried most of my friends. I've watched people die with their music still in them, their businesses never started, their books never written, their trips never taken. Not because they couldn't, because they were waiting. Waiting for permission from people who had no authority to grant it. Waiting for certainty in an uncertain world. Waiting for someone who knew better to tell them what to do. Waiting for the fear to go away before they acted. The fear doesn't go away. You act anyway. That's the whole thing. I'm 95. I have maybe 2 years left if I'm lucky. Probably less. And you know what I'm doing with that time? Whatever I want. Because I finally learned what I'm trying to teach you now. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to make it make sense. Nobody's going to tell you when you're ready or give you permission to live your life.
You just have to decide you're going to do it anyway. So stop waiting for the experts who don't have the answers. Stop looking for the plan that doesn't exist. Stop seeking permission from authorities who are just as lost as you are. Start acting like you have the right to decide what matters. Because you do. Start making decisions even though you don't have all the information. You never will. Start building the life you actually want instead of the one you think you're supposed to want. Start now, not next year, not when conditions are better, not when you feel ready. Now. Because the world isn't run by people who know better than you. It's run by people who act despite not knowing. And you can do that too.
If this changes something for you, share this video. Send it to someone who's stuck waiting. Leave a comment and tell me one thing you're going to stop waiting for permission to do. And subscribe if you want to hear the rest of what I have to say. I'm 95 years old. I'm running out of time. And I have a few more uncomfortable truths to share before I go. You might want to hear them. The clock is ticking, not just for me, for you too. What are you going to do with your time?